In 1993, the trial of Erik and Lyle Menendez captivated the nation, but it wasn't just the gruesome details of their crime that held the public's attention. It was the dark family secrets that emerged. According to court records, allegations of extreme abuse surfaced, with Erik testifying that both brothers had endured years of physical, emotional, and sexual trauma at the hands of their parents. The case exposed a shocking statistic. Over 40% of American families report some form of abuse, yet few cases ever reach the public eye. As the Menendez brothers' trial unfolded, it revealed not just the murder of their parents, but a deep-seated history of dysfunction that blurred the lines between victims and perpetrators. Were these two young men ruthless killers, or were they acting in desperate defense against a family dynamic that had been kept in the shadows for far too long? On the night of August 20, 1989, Beverly Hills was rocked by the brutal murders of entertainment executive José Menendez and his wife, Kitty, in their luxurious home. The culprits? Their own sons, Erik and Lyle Menendez. The Menendez brothers initially claimed ignorance, but within months they were arrested for the crime. What followed was one of the most sensational trials in American history, a trial that exposed shocking secrets about the Menendez family's dark underbelly. At first glance, Erik and Lyle seemed like the embodiment of privilege. They lived in a mansion, attended the best schools, and were set to inherit a fortune. But as their defense unraveled, the public was introduced to a narrative of unimaginable abuse and torment that no one had seen coming. According to the brothers, their parents were not just wealthy and controlling, they were violent, abusive, and manipulative. As the trial progressed, jurors and the public alike were forced to grapple with the disturbing revelations about the family's private life. Was the murder of José and Kitty Menendez a premeditated act of greed, or a desperate attempt by their sons to escape a cycle of abuse? This is the question that haunts the Menendez case to this day, and it remains one of the most debated topics in true crime history. The central issue in the Menendez brothers' trial wasn't just about whether they killed their parents. That fact was indisputable. Instead, the challenge lay in understanding why they did it. On the surface, the crime seemed like a textbook case of cold-blooded murder for financial gain. After all, the brothers stood to inherit their parents' multi-million-dollar estate. They went on a lavish spending spree in the months following the killings, buying cars, clothes, and even a business. However, the defense argued that this was no ordinary case of patricide. According to Erik and Lyle, their parents' murders were not motivated by greed, but by fear of a lifetime of continued abuse. During the trial, the brothers detailed a childhood marred by physical, sexual, and psychological abuse at the hands of both their father and their mother. José Menendez, a successful but tyrannical businessman, was portrayed as a cruel, controlling figure who sexually abused his sons for years. Kitty Menendez, they claimed, was mentally unstable and complicit in the abuse, either by directly participating or turning a blind eye. The allegations of sexual abuse were particularly shocking. Erik testified that his father had molested him from the time he was a young boy, a secret he had kept buried for years. Lyle corroborated the story, describing his own experiences of abuse and the immense pressure they both felt to maintain the family's image of success. The abuse, they claimed, became so unbearable that it drove them to a breaking point. The defense painted a picture of two boys who had grown into young men trapped in an impossible situation, living under the constant threat of violence and humiliation, with no one to turn to for help. They argued that the brothers saw no way out other than to kill their parents, a desperate act to escape a life of torment. But this narrative didn't sit well with everyone. The prosecution, for its part, dismissed the claims of abuse as a convenient excuse. They argued that the brothers had carefully planned the murders, motivated by greed and a desire to inherit their parents' wealth. The spending spree that followed the killings was, in the prosecution's view, proof of their cold-heartedness. They had shown no remorse for their actions, instead indulging in a lavish lifestyle while their parents' bodies had barely been laid to rest. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. On one side, the defense portrayed the brothers as victims of unimaginable abuse who had snapped under the pressure. On the other, the prosecution presented them as cunning killers who had concocted a false narrative of abuse to avoid punishment. The challenge for the jury was to determine the truth. Were Erik and Lyle Menendez telling the truth about their father's sexual abuse, or was this a carefully crafted defense strategy designed to manipulate public sympathy? The answer wasn't easy to discern, and it raised broader questions about how society views abuse victims who commit violent crimes. Can trauma justify murder, or should the law treat all killers the same, regardless of their personal histories? The story of the Menendez brothers didn't start with the murders. It began in their early childhood. José Menendez was born in Cuba and emigrated to the United States after the Cuban Revolution. A driven and ambitious man, he worked his way up the corporate ladder, eventually becoming an executive in the entertainment industry. He married Mary Louise Kitty Anderson, and the couple had 2 sons, Lyle and Erik. To outsiders, the Menendez family seemed to have it all: wealth, success, and status. They lived in a sprawling mansion in Beverly Hills, their children attended prestigious schools, and they were fixtures in elite social circles. But beneath the surface, the family dynamic was far from perfect. José was a domineering patriarch. He had high expectations for his sons, particularly in terms of academic and athletic achievements. Lyle, the elder brother, was groomed to follow in his father's footsteps. He was expected to excel at everything he did, and failure was not an option. Erik, on the other hand, was more sensitive and struggled to meet his father's rigid standards. As a result, he became the primary target of his father's wrath. According to the brothers' testimony, José's abuse began when they were very young. It started with physical beatings, but over time, the abuse escalated into sexual violence. Erik, in particular, was subjected to repeated molestation by his father, who threatened to kill him if he ever told anyone. The abuse created a toxic environment of fear and secrecy within the household. Kitty, who struggled with her own mental health issues, was often distant and emotionally unavailable. She turned to alcohol and prescription drugs, which only exacerbated the family's dysfunction. The psychological toll of the abuse was immense. Both brothers suffered from depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. Erik, in particular, became withdrawn and suicidal. He confided in his brother Lyle about the abuse, but both boys felt powerless to escape their father's control. Despite their privileged upbringing, they lived in constant fear of their father's wrath. As the brothers entered adulthood, the abuse continued to haunt them. Lyle attended Princeton University but was expelled for plagiarism, a blow that deepened the rift between him and his father. Erik, who had shown promise as a tennis player, struggled to find his place in the world, weighed down by the trauma of his past. The pressure to maintain the appearance of a perfect family, combined with the unresolved pain of their childhood, created a volatile situation. In the months leading up to the murders, tensions in the Menendez household reached a boiling point. The brothers, now in their 20s, were increasingly rebellious and resentful of their parents. Arguments became more frequent, and the threat of violence loomed large. According to the defense, the final straw came when José allegedly told Erik that the abuse would continue, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. On the night of August 20, 1989, the brothers took matters into their own hands. Armed with shotguns, they entered their parents' bedroom and shot them multiple times. The crime was brutal and shocking, but for the brothers, it was the culmination of years of pent-up fear and rage. The most pivotal moment in the trial came when Erik, under oath, revealed a family secret that no one outside the Menendez household had known: the sexual abuse he had endured at the hands of his father. In a tearful testimony, Erik described in graphic detail the molestation he suffered and the psychological manipulation his father used to keep him silent. The courtroom was stunned. Up until that point, the trial had focused primarily on the physical and emotional abuse the brothers claimed to have experienced. But the revelation of sexual abuse added a new layer of complexity to the case. Suddenly, the narrative shifted from one of simple patricide to one of survival. The defense argued that the brothers' actions, while horrific, were the result of years of trauma and fear. They weren't motivated by greed, the defense claimed. They were trying to protect themselves from a father who had terrorized them for years. The revelation of sexual abuse also changed the public's perception of the case. Many who had initially viewed the brothers as spoiled rich kids looking to inherit their parents' fortune began to reconsider their stance. Could it be that Erik and Lyle were victims as well as perpetrators? The idea that the brothers had been driven to murder by years of sexual abuse struck a chord with many who understood the chilling effects of trauma. It raised a moral and legal dilemma. Should individuals who commit violent crimes under the influence of severe psychological and sexual abuse be treated the same as premeditated murderers? The media frenzy around the trial intensified after Erik's testimony. Talk shows, news outlets, and court TV segments debated the implications of the brothers' claims. Psychologists were brought in to discuss the potential mental health impacts of long-term sexual abuse, and the concept of battered child syndrome was introduced as a defense. This syndrome, similar to battered spouse syndrome, argues that children who endure years of abuse may develop a belief that violence is their only escape. However, the prosecution wasn't convinced. They maintained that the brothers had fabricated the claims of sexual abuse to gain sympathy and avoid a harsh sentence. They pointed to the fact that the brothers had gone on extravagant spending sprees after the murders, purchasing luxury cars, expensive watches, and starting a business. This behavior, the prosecution argued, was inconsistent with that of traumatized victims acting out of self-defense. Despite the evidence of abuse, the trial continued to focus on whether the brothers' actions were justified or motivated by greed. The prosecution relentlessly attacked their character, calling into question the credibility of their testimony and suggesting that the brothers had planned the murders to escape their father's control while simultaneously reaping the financial benefits. For the jury, the case presented an agonizing choice. Were the Menendez brothers guilty of first-degree murder, or should their abusive upbringing be considered as mitigating factors? As the trial drew to a close, the tension in the courtroom was palpable, and the nation waited anxiously for the verdict. The Menendez brothers' trial exposed the complex and tragic dynamics of a family that, on the surface, appeared to have it all. The shocking revelations of abuse, both physical and sexual, forced the public to confront uncomfortable truths about the hidden traumas that can exist behind closed doors, even in seemingly perfect families. Ultimately, after 2 separate trials and much deliberation, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict in the first trial, resulting in a mistrial. A second trial, held in 1996, led to the brothers being convicted of first-degree murder. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a punishment that many viewed as harsh, given the allegations of abuse. Others, however, felt that justice had been served, arguing that the killings were premeditated and driven by greed. The Menendez brothers' case has since become a cultural touchstone in discussions of abuse, mental health, and the criminal justice system. The trial revealed the ways in which trauma can influence behavior, but it also highlighted the difficulties in proving such claims in a court of law. Erik and Lyle's story serves as a reminder that, while the legal system may seek clear answers, human motivations are often far more complex. In the years following their conviction, both brothers have expressed remorse for their actions. From behind bars, they have spoken about their regret and the deep scars left by the abuse they endured. The Menendez Brothers case remains one of the most divisive and debated in true crime history, raising critical questions about the relationship between abuse, trauma, and criminal responsibility. As society continues to grapple with these issues, the Menendez case remains a powerful reminder that the truth is not always black and white. The dark secrets of the Menendez family may never be fully understood, but their story has left an indelible mark on our understanding of justice and the human psyche. The case of the Menendez brothers challenges us to think deeply about the connections between trauma, abuse, and crime. What do you think? Were the brothers victims of their circumstances, or were they motivated by greed? Do you believe their abuse should have been considered more strongly during their sentencing? Share your thoughts in the comments below and join the discussion about one of the most notorious true crime cases in American history. If you're interested in more stories like this, be sure to subscribe to Storyteller for in-depth explorations of infamous cases, unsolved mysteries, and the darker side of human nature.